Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for inviting us at Western Cape Bee Association to share what we're doing for the pollination industry, the producers, the beekeepers. Thank you, Herman. I think that was a great presentation, and some of the points he made will overlap in my presentation. We're going to start with this little clip.
Bees are my passion, and I want to see them survive, and I want to see them healthy, and it's so rewarding to see that our bees are healthy, and we're trying really hard to look for the future of the bee industry, to support agriculture and to have bees. I think bees are beautiful. Honey bees, their main role is not to do honey production, that's actually a byproduct, but honey bees are pollinators of the planet. We plant our trees and our crops so intensively that we cannot get enough pollinators in unless we bring them in. Agriculture is completely reliant on honeybees to be able to be sustainable so that they can provide jobs for people who support so many families, and it's just so multifaceted. You know, you take the bee out of the equation and then the rest of it starts to collapse. The agricultural sector is expanding at an alarming rate, and the amount of forage for the bees is doing that. So it's getting less. To expand the bee industry to cater for the expanding agriculture industry, we need food for the bees, suitable, diverse nutrition for them. The farmer who uses the bees has a role to play. I'm very optimistic in the big grand picture. The awareness that is around nowadays is a great start to helping the bees. People are more considerate of bees with their use of land, what they're planting in their gardens.
Right, so the importance of bees as the global demand for food security increases, so the role of our bees shifts from honey production towards pollination of the many crops dependent on their services. And at Western Cape Bee Association, we support this very necessary industry of fresh food production through guiding the changes in the pollination industry, professionalizing the service with higher standards and good service. And a lot of producers will say, why pay so much for pollination? And yeah, what do you want? Do you want a Tata or do you want a Toyota? You know, if you're paying peanuts, you're going to get monkeys, and the same applies to your pollination fees. So I'm going to cover what it takes for us beekeepers to meet these standards for the beehives, which Herman mentioned, and what the costs are involved and how much effort goes into them. I'm just struggling with this bar on the top of my screen. There we go. Yeah, it's not just about driving to our apiaries and loading hives and dropping them off in your pollination farm. This is such a cheap service, and it's not going to ensure good quality or quantity of crop. There's a hell of a lot of work that goes into providing a professional service, as you'll see later in this presentation. If you're receiving hives like this one, I would be seriously questioning what you're getting for your pollination service. Oh, not working. Come on, there we go. So my presentation is the pollination dance and our beekeepers' costs. And providing strong hives each year is not easy. Our challenges start immediately after the season when we have to remove our beehives. As you guys know, you need to protect your crops and use chemicals and things. So our mad rush to get our beehives out of the orchards, transit camps, and then we move them to our safe summer sites where there is suitable forage to sustain them. And this is a massive challenge as our reliable forage is being mowed down at an alarming rate. And as you can imagine, we're having to drive further and we have to pay more for paying for places to keep our bees nowadays alive between the pollination seasons, because that's the challenge between each season. So honey production is really a thing of the past, as most of the forage, or a huge amount of forage, is being mowed down, like you're seeing in this picture. So we're moving the hives throughout the year, before, during, and after the pollination season. It's one of our highest costs, really, the moving. You take your drivers, cost of a new bucky, depreciation, running costs, trailer costs, brakes, bearings, tires, all of that. Depreciation, they're all costs that we have to handle as bee farmers. And then we have the challenges in summertime on our safe sites of this new fire season that's become prevalent in the Western Cape. We normally end up trying to get there on time, but our apiaries are far away now. And by the time we get there, we see scenes like this where there's just spijkertjies and frame wires left behind. And then the next challenge is South Africa, vandalism and theft. And I think we all experience it, whether you're a producer or a bee farmer in a lot of different industries. But a new beehive, when we have this problem, costs us at least 1,700 Rand. And with all of these challenges, their life expectancy is becoming shorter. So with our diminishing availability of forage, what do we end up doing is we have to do like the rest of the world when there's no food and we're having to feed sugar syrup and protein of sorts to make up for the shortage of staph meal, which is so important, as Herman mentioned, to brood production and for the larvas. So after summer, we move into the fynbos areas. That is the fynbos that has survived the summer fire season. And our bees have co-evolved with the fynbos, so they get nice and healthy through the winter months, and then we move them onto the canola. But even in the fynbos, due to the diminishing amount of fynbos available and access to certain areas which have beautiful fynbos but we're prohibited from moving to, we're having to feed. So we travel to our sites for normal management at least once a month. As Herman mentioned, in the canola season, it's once every 2 to 3 weeks. Distances, 100 kilometers, but sometimes often more. And we service between 100 and 150 hives a day, depending on the number of sites and distances. So there's not much flowering in the winter months. So we feed beehives, as I mentioned, with sugar. Maybe 5 kgs over the year. Price of sugar, 16 to 20 Rand a kg. It's quite a big expense already. We're also feeding a pollen supplement to the bees, maybe a kg, 1.5 kgs at 40 to 50 Rand a kg. And both of these are very necessary to stimulate our hives, keep them robust and healthy for the early pollinations, especially blueberries and plums. But those hives we're going to be using them after that, so we need to make sure they've suitably strength, meeting the standards of the WCBA. We also have other problems. That's our honey badger problems. We have to secure our hives with chains and boards and poles and stands and cages. costing dollars. So let's pause here. All this work is to keep our beehives alive and healthy so that they can help you produce quality fruit by pollinating your flowers. And this is really the most important event in your tree's yearly cycle. So what is this all about, this pollination thing? As Herman mentioned, the pollen is used to feed young larvae. And the figures might be slightly different, but they're very similar. A larva needs 10,000 nurse bee visits during development. And so it works out to about every 43 seconds. And the food is made from the larval food, which you see in the back of these cells. That milky product is made from a pollen-based diet, which the bees eat and mix with enzymes from their glands and make this royal jelly. So that we therefore need a large amount of hungry developing bees in all stages to create this demand for pollen, as Herman mentioned. There we go. We have the larva needing to be fed. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's about. Those larvae needing food made from pollen. So as set out in the WCBA standards, the average strength of a pollination unit needs to be 4 frames of brood in all stages, with lots of hungry little larvae, as I showed you pictures and little clips of, and then 8 frames covered with bees to service the colony's needs. Quite difficult to always achieve these standards with the cold weather and winter. So what does it take for us to reach these standards and ensure a great pollination service for you producers? And canola came along and it saved the day. It's great nutrition for the bees, great high protein content in the pollen, lots of nectar. And this will stimulate the bees and the queen, who lays thousands of eggs in a day. And what do we end up with? We end up with hungry mouths, hungry larvae looking for pollen. And that's what we need for you guys. So we start our preparation for the pollination season by collecting and moving all our beehives from their many sites all around to the canola fields. It's a lot of work and comes with a big cost for us of fuel and labor, driving long distances further and further to our apiary sites. And then we'll visit, in the canola season, we'll visit our hives 5 to 6 times over that 6, 7, 8, 2 months. And it's exhaustive work. Bent over hive after hive after hive all day, feeding, disease inspections, equipment replacement, manipulating, checking the hive strength. So we have the correct amount of brood and bees. But canola nutrition does create healthy bees. They're crazy and angry and they're difficult to work with. So my brother-in-law, after helping me one day, so we have to wear good condition protective clothes, boots, overalls, gloves, and veils. Ka-ching, ka-ching. And once our colonies are of the sufficient strength, we're meeting the standards, we check them, we add an empty super on top, which provides extra space for preventing overheating during transport, as well as that extra space helps with swarming caused by congestion. So we'll strap them up, straps and buckles, close any small holes to prevent leaking during transport, and deliver for their pollination duties. This is a little clip of us preparing bees. Yeah, not such nice work as you can see. The bees are at war. So by now you can see that pollination beekeepers have escalating running costs, just all of the things I mentioned earlier on. And it's not easy. We have many challenges and costs for us to provide a good pollination service. It's not a thumbsuck amount which we increase annually according to imaginary numbers and where the stars are positioned. The WCBA has carefully calculated a recommended pollination fee to help beekeepers do their calculations and costings, as our expenses are, like the producer's expenses, also increasing annually. So this is the spreadsheet we use at WCBA. I'm not going to go through all the points of it, but we don't just suck a figure out of we don't just thumb suck a figure. It's a complicated equation. If you put in the cost of things, you'll see that it's reasonable. In 2022, the recommended fee was 1092. And we didn't increase it this year even. But our costs did go up in the last year. I'm not going to unpack this whole equation. It's for us to use when we're doing our costings. But I've highlighted some of the expenses we're facing in preparing and delivering a professional pollination service. It's not a cheap service, considering it's the most important event in your tree's yearly cycle. So why take a chance and pay less? And if you're paying less, receiving less, you must ask yourself, what type of pollinations are you receiving or delivering as a beekeeper? Have the hives been cared for and prepared correctly? And how can a producer expect his beekeeper to supply pollination units of a high standard at a low price with all of our costs? Makes you think, doesn't it? So as a producer, how can you ensure that you're receiving a good pollination service? So according to recent research, bees are very loyal to the plant or tree which they are visiting, thus not visiting multiple cultivars while foraging. And the actual transfer of pollen is happening within the hive when the bees brush up against each other before leaving on their next flight. So to increase this pollen transfer, we advise that you place your hives in warm, happy places, as Microsoft calls them, where the beehives warm up earlier in the mornings, and the bees can begin their foraging. Secondly, after 24 hours, as Herman recommended, take a drive through the orchards, have a look what the activity is. If it's a cold day, you're going to see very little activity. On warmer days above 18 degrees, you'll pick up if the activity is missing on some hives, or if there's sponges or things left blocking the hives, or if there are any other problems, dead bees in front of the hives. So they should all have similar activities, and then walk in the orchards and count bee activity. We've got a monitor form, which I'll show you briefly afterwards, and guidelines that go with it to monitor your bee activity. Important, though, as Herman mentioned, written contracts where all the expectations are covered, standards, delivery times and removal, pollination period, duration of it, how long the bees are going to stay in there. Also on the WCBA website under pollination, there's the standards. Hive delivery and removal should be in the dark or in rainy, cold weather when bees are not flying. So you're going to get the best quality bees if you can get your beekeeper to stick to that. But this night work is quite tricky, and so gates need to be open, stands ready. The person who's going to help show where the stands are needs to be available, contactable. No use arriving at the farm and you can't reach that person because it's Friday night. Very, very frustrating for the beekeeper when you have those problems after spending the whole evening driving, loading beehives. But also to follow BMPs where hives are placed for pollination, no harmful chemicals whatsoever. And all of this boils down to really communication. Communication is king, as we all know. But there are many other things one can do, and I'm sure Mike is going to discuss those in his presentation. This is our monitor form and some guidelines in Afrikaans. Also on the should be on the WCBA website under pollination. I'm not going to go through it. You guys can read it in your own time. And this comes to the end of my presentation. There's the WCBA email address, and you'll get your standards there. Contracts are just a guideline which can be edited. And if you have any further queries, this is Herman's email address. He deals with the pollination portfolio.